Hi everyone, and thank you for signing up for this TÜV webinar on cybersecurity of medical devices, the requirements of the notified body. I will be your moderator today, and I'll go through some basic information before we kick off with the presentation. So some basic housekeeping so that this session is smooth. First, we have people calling in from different locations, so you are on mute to reduce background noise. Secondly, this is intended to be a 1-hour session with 15 to 20 minutes for question and answers at the end. So at any time during this session, you can send in your questions directly to the host TÜV, and we will address them at the end. Lastly, this session will be recorded and made available on demand later on. So we will also be sending you an email with the download link to the presentation slides later this week or early next week. So before we start, here's a quick introduction of our speaker today. We have with us Dr. Andreas Pruder, who is the Global Director of Functional Safety, Software, and Digitization for Medical Devices at TÜV. Andreas joined TÜV 13 years ago as an auditor and specialist in functional safety. Prior to this, he completed his PhD in electrical engineering and did a short spell in the semiconductor industry. Today, he is responsible for global functional safety and digitization of the medical devices. So with that, I will now hand the presentation over to Andreas, who will kick off with the importance of cybersecurity. Over to you, Andreas.
Okay, so also good morning or good afternoon from my side, wherever you are located. Thank you for participating in this webinar on cybersecurity with the intention to tell you what are the expectations of the notified body like TÜV. First of all, I would like to talk about the reasons why we are talking about the topic at all. Secondly, I want to give you an overview of the standards and guidance documents which currently exist, and we'll talk a little bit about the free guidance Professor Jona and us and other parties compiled for you to give you a kind of guidance until we have an international aligned standard on that topic. The fourth point would be that we will talk about what you can expect during an audit and technical documentation assessment. And last but not least, I will talk about the services which are offered by us as a test house or notified body, of course. Okay, the first question, as indicated, was why are we talking about the topic at all? And the first question to answer is who needs or wants cybersecurity devices? The first party would actually be the patients. Patients don't like to see their device being in the press that it has been subject to a cybersecurity attack, so they are afraid of devices which are not cyber secure. So this is the first party having an interest in cybersecurity devices. Secondly, also the competent authorities are waking up. If you are in the US or bound to FDA requirements, you should be probably used to questions from the competent authority, the FDA. If you're not getting into that region, you probably did not have any questions from the competent authority yet, but this will change. I will tell you what our competent authority in Germany said earlier this year. We also have laws and standards requiring it. I will also give a short overview of what is required on the law side, basically. And then us, the notified bodies, it's TÜV, and of course also the other ones we definitely have to start asking you questions about cybersecurity in audit and technical documentation assessments. And hopefully, last but not least, you should have an interest in compiling cybersecurity devices or building cybersecurity devices. And I think the reasons are clear. You don't want to be in the press indicating that your device had a security hole which is known since years and you were not able to get rid of it, and that kind of press releases probably you don't want to have. So this is the first reason I'm talking about is you don't want to be in the press. So those are just press releases from the past years. So whether we had a cybersecurity vulnerability of St. Jude implants, second one that the hospital IT was targeted by some cyber attacks is a press release you don't want to have, or for the German-speaking guys here, it basically tells you that a defibrillator might be used as a weapon to kill somebody here. So those are press releases you want to avoid. Or also this one, depending on which publication you're looking at, there are people out in the world who are saying that the remote access system hacking is the #1 patient safety risk in the future, of course, only of network devices. This is what some people say also out in the world there. So obviously it seems to be a topic which is important nowadays, and we have to cover it somehow. This is also what the competent authority, one of our competent authorities in Germany said, the BfArM, they are basically only responsible for all those post-market activities. So when you have an incident, they will be the one checking whether your field safety corrections are the right one. They indicated earlier this year on their Cybersecurity Day, the most important message is we must not lose trust. What they wanted to say is basically they are currently seeing that patients are moving away from connected devices and trying to take older ones which are not connected because they are afraid of cybersecurity attacks. And that's something which probably should not happen. And they also indicated in Germany, they admitted that nothing has happened so far in Germany in terms of cybersecurity. So there was no patient injured or harmed due to a cybersecurity threat, but they indicated to all the participants, most of them are manufacturers, indicating them start anyhow. So despite the fact that nothing has happened so far, you as a manufacturer have to start dealing with cybersecurity. That's the expectation of the competent authorities. So that's also one of the reasons why you are listening maybe to that presentation. Currently, I have the feeling that most manufacturers are like this at the moment, the sleeping dog. If I would look into my clients, asking them, okay, what do you do in terms of cybersecurity? I would probably say that 85% would probably answer, yes, we should do something, but currently they do not do anything. And this is probably something which has to change in the very next future, that you are starting dealing with the topic cybersecurity. So this webinar, as well as our questions in the technical documentation and in the audit in the first couple of months will be something like wake the sleeping dog. So we want to wake up you to start dealing with the topic of cybersecurity. Then sometimes when you're talking to clients, telling them, okay, you have to deal with cybersecurity now, you get a lot of yes buts. And some of them yes buts are mentioned here. You don't have to read that one. I will give you a bigger one here. That's basically a poster which was a post of a hacker conference, and it basically named all the excuses people indicated that they don't want to deal with cybersecurity, and just to mention some of them. Well, it was not in my project scope. It's a legacy system. It's an old system. I can't do anything. It's too critical to patch. It's out of my budget. We've always done it like this, and then nothing ever happened so far. And those are typical excuses we're going to have. Of course, we know those excuses, but you probably also know that at the end of the day, the excuses don't count in case something happens. So please get rid of these excuses as they are not valid anymore. Something we also have to know in terms of cybersecurity is that cybersecurity plus all those other requirements like usability, maintainability, cost efficiency, simplicity of a device and functionality of a device would result in something like this. In Germany, we call it eierlegende Wollmilchsau, basically an animal which is able to do everything. It is well understood by us, as well as I assume also the other notified bodies, that cybersecurity has a special role in medical devices, and it must not negatively affect all the other ones like usability or maintainability. So there always has to be a kind of evaluation whether I want to go into cybersecurity or usability and which one wins. at the end of the day is a critical question. This is well understood, but anyhow, you have to go that way and ask yourself the question, what can I do in order to maintain all those things to at least an acceptable level. No more yes buts, but that's all from the yes but why you don't want to do things. We have a couple of legal requirements, just to mention two of them. The MDR, that's also one of the trigger points, of course, from our side, will indicate in its general safety and performance requirements, it says for devices that incorporate software or for software that are devices in themselves, the software shall be developed in accordance with state-of-the-art, taking into account the principles of information security. So from a legal perspective, the MDR requires us to deal with information security, and it also states that this kind of dealing with cyber information security has to be state-of-the-art. That's what they say. Nowadays, most of you or all of you did not transfer to MDR yet. The MDD indicates that it's a little bit weaker in the MDD because the time was not there to talk about cybersecurity when the MDD was built. It says the solution adopted by the manufacturers for the design and construction of the device must conform to safety principles, taking account of generally acknowledged state-of-the-art. That's a very weak requirement, but anyhow it is used by people like us, notified bodies and competent authorities as well, of course, to push you in the direction of, please take a look what's going on in other fields of the industry, not necessarily medical devices, to see what do other industries do in terms of cybersecurity, and if something is state-of-the-art, like an encryption over communication channel, if this is rated state-of-the-art, it is a valid question, why don't you do that on a medical device? So that's pretty much the legal requirement. So very strong indication in the MDR, a little weaker requirement in the MDD, indicating that you, as a manufacturer, have to do something in terms of cybersecurity. So that was the first part, a kind of motivation indicating why is it important to talk about it. Please keep in mind that the competent authorities want to have it, not only the FDA, but also in this case the German competent authority clearly indicated they want you to do something. And of course, if you know, reading through the press, that cybersecurity is a fancy topic right now, has a lot of public awareness, so it's probably a good idea to deal with that one. The next part of my presentation will cover the standards and guidance documents, where we'll want to give an overview first, and then jump to a little bit into the free guidance Professor Jona and us, alongside with other parties, published a couple of weeks ago. So that will be the next part. Of course, you say, if I want to deal with cybersecurity, I need to know how I have to do that. Also, the BfArM on their cybersecurity day indicated that those are the standards which you have, which are harmonized under the MDD, which deals somehow with the topic of cybersecurity. So it's basically our risk management standard, the ISO 14971. It is the 62304, our software development standard. Then we have the ISO 80001. Then we have a German paper, unfortunately, only the recommendations from our Bundesministerium für Informationssicherheit, so it's not BSI, our competitor, it's a German authority for cybersecurity. They have written a paper which is called Cyber Requirements for Network Devices, basically, and pretty much they indicated the BfArM that it's under the MDD-MDR. So looking into those ones, you will probably not be happy because the requirements stated in there are a little weak, and don't give you precise requirements what you have to do and what you have to think about. If you extend your search, you will end up in, unfortunately, tons of requirements. You have a UL standard 2900, then you have an IEC 62443-4-1, then you have AMI requirements, tier 57, then you have NIST requirements, and taking all those into consideration, you will probably end up with 30-something different guidance documents and standards dealing with the topic cybersecurity for medical devices or other industries. So none of them is harmonized, those ones in the blue bubble here, none of them is harmonized, but anyhow they exist and might be used by you as a guidance on what to do in terms of cybersecurity. Most manufacturers end up in the feeling like this when they see all those different requirements and standards being out there. You have tons of requirements or tons of guidance documents or standards dealing with different requirements, all of them somehow telling the same thing but not in the same words. So it's a kind of chaos. And what a lot of my customers did in that situation, that they basically went through all of those guidance documents and trying to make an extract out of those ones to build up a kind of their own house internal set of requirements for cybersecurity. Having this in mind, also TÜV did that one. That's just an example. The compilation we did, for example, for a product, not the process. So you will see that a lot of requirements for cybersecurity target the process side, a lot of requirements target the product side. This was our compilation, which we did internally for us for a product. It does not only cover the harmonized standards, but we also looked in other industries what kind of standards exist out there, which are, for example, the UL, the already mentioned one, which is for cybersecurity of medical devices, but in the US and not necessarily in Germany, and those kinds of things. And pretty much what we did, and I think a lot of you probably did the same thing, they were compiling a kind of internal checklist for themselves, taking out all those different requirements. And for example, one of the questions we have in our internal checklist is cybersecurity risk management documentation available? So meaning, did you cover cybersecurity and risk management? And when you see a little bit in that screenshot here, you can see that this is required by 60601, it's required by 62304, it's required in AMI Tier 57. So all of those standards which are out there talk about similar things. It's not that they always reinvent the wheel, so they are pretty similar in some senses. Then we said, well, can't we publish that? Despite the fact we currently don't have an international standard on cybersecurity, it's under development. We will participate in the development of those standards, but we said during the time it will be available approximately in 2 years, I assume. Isn't there a way to publish what we know already? We have done that. So we have taken all those standards which you see here on the left side, put them in our brains and compiled what we call the currently Jona TÜV Süd and TÜV Nord also participated, and Metzer, I think, and as well as our partners from the TÜV Süd Tech IT, they all contributed to that free guidance which is available under this link here, and we will have a short look into that one. So this guidance is intended in case you are having difficulties identifying the applicable requirements for you in terms of cybersecurity. You may use this guidance as an option to see what do I have to do in order to build a cybersecurity device which would in the end fulfill the essential requirements or general safety and performance requirements. So that's our intention. It is also our intention that this guidance document is only existing until we have an international standard. Once we have an international standard, we will withdraw it, bringing it back. Having a look into that one, that's basically how it looks like. When you see the screenshot, it's on GitHub. So a little nerdy stuff, it's on GitHub, allowing us the possibility to branch and forth. You may use it for free, you can use it, you can change it, you can market it, whatever you want to do. The only requirement you have, if you use it, you have to mention the author. That's it, but it's in the legal requirements and the standard. I don't have to go into details here. So having a look into the guidance, a little bit, what does it say? It basically is 3 sections. The first one is general requirements, the second one is process requirements, and the last one is product requirements. So also here you see that this is also where the international standard will move to, that the process requirements will be separated from product requirements. The general requirements will cover what kind of processes you have to implement, what kind of competences you should have in your company, and what kind of documentation you have to build. The process requirements then talk about the product development process and a very important phase, which might easily be overlooked, that you have to have a system for the post-development phases, so all the market surveillance activities, in order to get updated security issues from the field. You have to have an effective post-market surveillance system for that as well, which is not necessarily the same as you have for medical devices. So the more database will probably not give you any information on cybersecurity threats. The product requirements are basically follow all the standards we have. So they start with the requirement phase, then we move into the architecture phase, and then the last thing which you have to cover is the component materials. So all the information you give to the user or the responsible organization. We decided when we were building this guidance that we want to do a stepwise approach. What I can't do toward you in the audit, that I raise the requirements from 0 to 100% within one audit. You probably might not be able to follow. Therefore, we decided to introduce levels. And the level 0 basically indicates that if you do not fulfill level 0 requirements, you're probably in the wrong field. So you should not be in medical devices if you don't fulfill level 0. So when you open the guidance document, you probably should first check, do I fulfill all level 0 requirements? Otherwise, you might be in trouble in the audit. The level 1 requirements should also be covered by you when you are hitting an audit first or a technical documentation assessment where we are asking for cybersecurity. That's the minimum requirements to start. If you fulfill those ones, we would be happy in year number 1. Sooner or later, you should be able to reach a level 2, which we think is state of the art. Additionally, we provided some also expert level requirements which are in level 3. You don't necessarily have to go there, but if you are a very advanced company, you might want to go there. That's the stepwise approach, again, in order to allow you to implement cybersecurity step by step if you're having difficulties with that. That's pretty much in terms of those guidances. So coming back to the question, what can you expect from the audit and the technical documentation assessment? We basically had 3 things where you can expect cybersecurity questions. The first one will be in the audit. So from the TÜV side, we are going to start in 2019 asking you cybersecurity questions in the audit. It might not be in January, so you might feel that somewhere in March, I don't know, whenever your audit is, but you should be prepared to get some cybersecurity questions here. We will also start including cybersecurity questions in our technical documentation assessments also from the beginning of next year. And what we also offer, if you are testing with us as a test house, we also offer cybersecurity testing of your devices. Of course, that's a voluntary part. You don't have to do it, but let's say audit and technical documentation questions you can't avoid. I will ask them anyhow whether you want or not. Let's ignore all those requirements and the YONA guide, and so for a second, let's make a short step back and start easy. So what is the absolute minimum thinking you should start with dealing with cybersecurity? So basically, the first question is it applicable, yes or no? Currently, we say there are 2 trigger points when cybersecurity should be applicable. The first one is if you have a network connection, and the second question is if you store confidential data, which might kind of be a negative impact when it is available to the public. So those are the 2 trigger points. If you say yes, cybersecurity would be applicable for me, then you have to document the interfaces. Documenting the interfaces basically means to say, okay, which interfaces do I have? Device to device, device to man, to a person. That would be the interfaces you have. I will have a different slide on the next page. And then you should simply apply risk management on all those interfaces, asking you the question of those so-called CIA. CIA basically means confidentiality, integrity, availability. Those are the protection targets you have in terms of cybersecurity. So you want confidentiality to be remained, you want integrity to be remained. Integrity means that your data is not falsified, and availability, of course, that you don't want that your device is not able to operate anymore because it is subject to a cybersecurity attack. So what could happen, therefore, is that you are running a denial of service attack to a dialysis machine, and if the dialysis machine is seeing that, and if it's not cyber secure, it might simply run out of processor power and not able to deliver appropriate treatment anymore. That would be availability. Then you have to assess those risks, those CIA risks, and then you have simply to implement measures to avoid hazards arising from CIA with SOTA, state-of-the-art measures. And the last thing we would like to check, of course, in the terms of risk management would be that your measures you have taken are implemented correctly and are, last but not least, effective. But that's the standard requirement of the ISO 14971, so nothing new in that sense. You also should consider implementing, which is a kind of new thing for you to implement measures for detection of cybersecurity attacks. It is currently the kind of state of the art in the industry. I would say that if in case you cannot prevent a cybersecurity attack, that you at least should detect it, so that you know that something's going on in the field and that you could take appropriate actions when you are aware of a cybersecurity attack. So most of the devices I currently have, or I know from technical documentation assessments or audit, don't have any measures implemented in order to detect cybersecurity attacks. The interfaces, what are they? Again, I said the interface is not only the interface between a machine and a machine, so it's the user with a device, the user or the device to a third person. Let's consider that that's a device the grandpa is using in order to change settings of an infusion pump or deep brain stimulator and so on. A third person could be the grandson who also wants to play around with the device. That kind of person could be there. Then you have, of course, the device-to-device connection, which is an interface, but also on the hospital side you have the physician. You might have staff which is not the physicians, or nursing staff or cleaning staff, who also might have an interface. And then, of course, the third person also to the hospital end or to the interconnection between those two. So please open your mind that the interface does not necessarily mean device to device, so it's also user to device and device to the device. Basically, those are the interfaces you should cover in risk management. When you evaluate those risks, again, we are in the context of how you should start with implementing cybersecurity. You should also consider two basic laws, I would say. That of course, you know that risk is the combination of probability of occurrence of harm and severity. And talking about the probability, you have to then note that probability is proportional to the benefit. Benefit means the benefit a hacker has when he penetrates or tries to penetrate your device. That's directly proportional to the probability. The harder you make it for the hacker to attack your device, the lower the probability is that something is going to happen. So those are the two basic rules in terms of the evaluation of risks, which you should keep in mind. Probability scales with the benefit and is opposite to the effort. That's basically the laws in terms of determining the probability of cybersecurity attacks to your device. What is state of the art? Basically, you always have to ask a question, what is state of the art? Probably not this picture here. Is not state of the art. When you want to see what state of the art, you can probably ask yourself a couple of questions or consult a lot of guidance documents. You will find it in Germany from the BSE. You will find it on the American or FDA pages and NIST guidance documents, which will indicate what kind of encryption algorithm is state of the art, that kind of question. But you can also start very similar. It is, of course, state of the art to evaluate all interfaces. It's also state of the art to choose the secure alternative of a communication protocol. In this example here, HTTPS instead of HTTP. And it's also state of the art to run your applications on a system with the minimum set of rights they need. It's also state of the art to protect your data from manipulation, meaning that you have to encrypt them or to add a checksum or whatever this means in your case. It's also state of the art not to include hard-coded access data. We had this in routers in the past that the default password is always 000, and 85% of the user never changed it. And if you're having a state-of-the-art router today, they typically have a unique password which is set for the device. Hard-coded access data is not state-of-the-art. Again, please, you might want to keep in mind that we have to consider usability and those other things as well. So it's not like that you have to avoid hard-coded access data, but you should think about that at least. And it's also state-of-the-art to check input data. Consider if you're having a web interface where the user can enter a name, you should probably check that what's coming along is a name and not an SQL query. That's also state-of-the-art. So please keep in mind, this guy here is not state-of-the-art, so you should be state-of-the-art with your implementations of risk mitigation measures. Also an interesting question which BfArM unfortunately answered. I'm very happy about this. They have been asked the case, do we have to cover, we call it the James Bond case. The James Bond case basically means that you have a hacker which is trying to access the device of a person XYZ because then I can kill this person because he's famous or because he's whatever. That's the so-called James Bond case. Or should we basically focus on this guy here? That's the, I don't know here, 12-year-old hacker sitting in the hospital waiting room and by chance disabling the whole hospital IT network because he is interested in what's going on there. And the BfArM clearly indicates, so the German competent authority clearly indicated you as a manufacturer and of course also we as notified body should focus that you implement measures against those collateral damages which happen from the people here on the right. So those 14-year-old hackers. It's not the task right now to protect from against very high sophisticated hackers. That's not our primary target, so we should avoid those collateral damage from the people on the right, not the James Bond case. This is clearly what they indicated, which allows you to focus your efforts to those kind of threats arising from those kind of persons. What you also have to do, you have to monitor the market. So you have to see what's going around, what's happening around you. As already indicated in the beginning, looking at the FDA MOD database is not sufficient for cybersecurity threats. So a typical audit question could be, how do you monitor cybersecurity threats arising? And then you have to give me a proper answer that you're monitoring, for example, in Germany, either security newsletter or wherever you are located, you probably have sources of cybersecurity threats which you have to do in a timely manner, and then to decide if something happens out in the field which affects you or your device, that you have to do something. That's monitoring the market. Again, it's different from what you do right now. Therefore, you have to adopt your processes. Last but not least, I would like to give you a short overview of the services we offer from our side in terms of cybersecurity, which you might want to utilize. I have to split those two things up. We offer services as a test house. We are testing against the Siona TÜV Süd open guidance or free guidance, as well as if you are more bound to the US regulations, We also perform tests according to UL 2900-2-1, and we also provide you with checklists if you want, according to the latest FDA guidances, Cybersecurity Part 11 and so on. This is what we do as test house, as notified body. We do this, what is on the right-hand side, whatever you deliver to us, whether it's our own test results or your own evidences, as already indicated, we have to assess whatever you provide in the audit or technical documentation for CE compliance. This is what we do as notified body. So those are the two services you might want to utilize. As notified body, of course, it's alongside with a conformity assessment procedure. It's not outside that. As a test house, of course, you can also utilize us, even if you're not with us as a notified body. That's what we can offer. A last reminder in terms of testing maybe is don't wait until it's too late, especially when you're developing a new product, because what you're probably going to get from a lot of test houses or people outside in the world is they will offer you those penetration testing stuff, fast testing or port scanning or whatever kind of stuff, which is probably pretty much at the end of the V model. So if you have your V model from start to implementation to release of your device, penetration testing is more or less at the end when your device is already finished. However, we want to encourage you that you want to use testing capabilities. We are not consulting, just to be clear on that. But it is, of course, valid that you provide us with a concept how you want to implement your cybersecurity in your device, that you ask us as a test house whether it would be possible to do a concept assessment. That's something we can offer as well. And I want to encourage you, don't wait until it's too late, until your device is finished. So if you would have the chance to ask for a concept assessment, please do so. Again, we're not consulting in this, so I can't tell you what you should do. You should always tell me what you're going to do, and I can cross-check it against the requirements and indicate whether your plan would be okay or not okay. And if it's not okay, you have to find another means. This brings us to the summary. As BfArM indicated, we must not lose the trust. That's their main concern, which we should focus on. So, dear medical device manufacturers on the line, please start dealing with cybersecurity, because we want to avoid you being in the press that something happened and the security hole is known since 20 years. Something like this should be avoided. We have to acknowledge that there's currently no harmonized standard under the MDD or MDR. However, there is help. So you can use any of the guidances I mentioned, or the standards, or you can use the IONA TÜV Süd open or free guidance, whatever you want to do, or you can compile your own set of requirements, whatever you want to do. There are tons of guidances out there, so no worries about that one. So you should be able to identify the requirements which are applicable for you. A clear statement is doing nothing is not an option at the moment, because the competent authorities tell you that you should do something, help is there, so doing nothing is not an option. If you do nothing, you will, I will remind you in the audit that you did nothing. You're probably going to get a non-conformity on that one if you do nothing. Indicating or telling you, please get started with thinking about cybersecurity now. It's not rocket science, so we are more than happy if you start working on the topic. Of course, it will be a ramp up. Sooner or later, you have to do more, but at the beginning, I want you to start and to think about it and to implement the necessary measures. That's pretty much all from my side, and now I will hand over to my colleague again, who will guide me through the questions you had, and I probably might have an answer to some of them, probably not all of them, but all of your questions will be answered latest later this week or next week. I will try to answer all your questions. So I hand over to my colleague again.
Thank you, Andreas, for this interesting insight. So, as Andreas mentioned, we will now take questions from the audience. So we have quite a few coming through already, but for the rest of you who haven't done so, please go ahead to send them through the Q&A function directly to the host to suit. So let's start with the ones here that we have. So the first one, Andreas, is how do we deal with legacy devices which are known not to be cyber secure?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges we have to solve. I know it from discussions of many manufacturers which we had, that they say, yes, I know that my device is not cyber secure, but in the field. I can only tell you that the only interesting option I've seen so far, it does not mean that there are no other options, is that there are companies out who are offering a kind of intermediate box, which you connect between your, for example, your Ethernet connection and your device, and this box will be responsible for maintaining cybersecurity. Probably you can implement that kind of box on your own, or you utilize one of the suppliers of such a box. That's currently the only option I saw in order to make a device which is not cybersecurity, or you have to change the whole source code, which you don't or might not want to do. So that could be an option. Apart from that, I know that's a tricky question, but that's currently the situation.
Okay, thanks for that. So I hope that addresses that question. The next one is, do I have to conduct penetration tests?
A good question. Also, we as the FDA don't give a clear answer on that one. I think it's kind of state of the art to do at least some penetration testing on your device. The core question, I think, is how much penetration testing do I actually need for the device? Neither the FDA nor the experts I've been talking about give a clear answer on that one. So at the end of the day, you have to come to a conclusion with your test house what kind of penetration tests make sense, keeping in mind that penetration test is at the end. So it's the better idea is, if you're having a new device, to do a concept evaluation with a test house first, to see that the concept is okay, and then of course do a little bit of penetration testing afterwards, which is also a good idea, yes. So in order to answer the question, do I have to? It's state of the art, so there might be an indication that you have to do at least a little, but the extent is questionable.
All right, thank you so much for that. So let's quickly move on to the next question. We have quite a few. What is the role of the responsible organization in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's also a good one, and also one of the excuses I heard in the past a lot. Manufacturers saying we are not responsible, we are giving the whole responsibility in terms of cybersecurity to the responsible organization, meaning to the hospital. That's not a valid argument. You are a partner. You as a manufacturer are a partner with the responsible organization, so they have to do their job and you have to do your job. And it's at the end of the day, it's split responses. So they have to ensure that the environment is how you specified it. But of course, you also have to, let's say, implement measures in order to detect that a cybersecurity attack has happened. You have to, as indicated in one of the slides before, ensure that only the minimum rights are used for the application to run and that kind of stuff. Yeah? So that's your responsibility, and you can't give that one away to the responsible organization.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a quick highlight to everyone that in case we are unable to address all questions before the end of this call, we will make sure that we'll contact you via email instead. So with that, Andreas, the next question is, are there any future trends in terms of new threats?
Yes. Of course, you will always see them running around. So currently we have the dynamite phishing mails which were running around today or the last couple of days. And what I also heard is that a new attack type is not to attack a device itself, but to attack the manufacturer who implements devices and to inject the malicious code right at the developer's desk into the device. So not to attack the device, but the developer in order to manipulate the source code to get malicious code on the device already during production or R&D phase.
All right, thank you for that. So the next question is, will there be any Class A medical device that requires cybersecurity documentation?
So probably I think the Class A might be for 62, 3 or 4. Requirement, I would say yes, as soon as it targets confidentiality. Probably not safety, because if you have Class A software, it's probably safe if you attack it, let's say it that way. But of course, you may want to consider whether confidentiality is a subject which you should cover, because typically you would not raise a higher software safety class B or C just because of confidentiality, but confidentiality anyhow is a protection target of cybersecurity. So I would say to a limited extent, it might also be applicable to software safety class A.
All right, thank you, Andreas. Okay, so this is a broader question. The question is, how do cybersecurity requirements need to be addressed during the manufacturing process of the medical device, i.e. non-software? An example would be during the ordering process, manufacturing of patient-specific custom device, as an example.
Yeah, we did not really cover that to an in-depth extent. So if you're talking about the development as such, or of course, or let me try to answer it in a different way. If you look at the Jonas Süd guidance, you will find requirements which are applicable to the processes which you use in order to develop a cybersecurity device. This is covered. What is not covered by this webinar, or what we have been talking about, is that of course you should also try to make your company cyber secure. So are people able to penetrate your company or to hack your company? But that's not the responsibility of us as a notified body, so that's something you have to do on your own. So for example, looking at a standard which is called 27001 is a very typical standard which our companies are implementing who want to claim that the company, not the products, that the company is cyber secure.
All right, thank you for that. I hope that addresses that question. Another one is related to clinical evaluation reports. So the question is, how do we add cybersecurity-related information into the clinical evaluation report? Is it enough to report the testing data and the standards used to achieve this?
Yeah, so probably the clinical evaluation report requires you to make a risk-benefit evaluation. And of course, cybersecurity is a part of those risks, among others. And so I probably would expect that the clinical evaluation report somehow indicates that all the risks in that field are sufficiently controlled. And this, of course, includes cybersecurity risks. So I don't want to tell you that you have to explicitly mention cybersecurity in your clinical evaluation report, as it is part of risk management anyhow, but of course you can write a sentence like this, that risk management covered all cybersecurity threats, and they have been mitigated down to a state-of-the-art level, and therefore we think blah, blah, blah. So something like this could be in the clinical evaluation. But again, I think it is part of the, let's say, overall risk evaluation in contrast to the clinical benefit.
All right, thank you for that. So another question that came through is, will you expect if we comply with the most recent FDA cybersecurity guidance, it will meet notified body expectations as well?
Yes. With one addition on that one, the FDA guidances pretty much target what you have to submit in terms of documentation. The FDA guidances are not that much process related. Of course, if you're looking at the other requirements which are out in the field, they will probably also call out requirements which apply to earlier phases of the development process, which the FDA guidances do not necessarily cover, because the FDA, at the end of the day, is interested in, if they are not auditing, but if you're talking about a 510K or PMA, they are interested what you submit in terms of documentation. Therefore, they say, I want to see that and that in your documentation. So therefore, the FDA guidances do not necessarily include all details or do not necessarily contain requirements on how you came to that conclusion. The European system is different because it wants you to have a structured approach to achieve a cybersecurity device, and therefore there are additional requirements which will be in Europe targeting the process side, so the process part, which are not part of the FDA. So in terms of technical documentation, I would say yes, FDA requirements should be sufficient for showing compliance, but please keep in mind that you should also adopt your processes such that they are able to achieve cybersecurity devices, which is not part of FDA requirements.
All right, thank you. This is device-specific question. What are the cybersecurity requirements for devices with a USB connection only, but no internet connection?
Well, of course, also the USB interface has a connection to is a connection to the outside. It is definitely less critical than all the other ones. But of course, you can ask yourself: is it possible that I upload a malformed update into the device? It's pretty much the question: what do you use the USB interface for? For example, if you use it for updates of the firmware, is it possible that I upload a wrong firmware to the device, or is the device checking that it's correct or not correct? But at the end of the day, it's not our primary focus. Why? Because if you have access to the device, a physical access to the device, it's easier to harm the patient right away, just not via the USB interface and then harming the patient. So we say our primary focus would be the network devices. So USB, you still should think about whether there's any risk behind that, but honestly, it's not our primary focus.
All right, thank you for that. Another question, more general question is, what will be a typical method to detect a cybersecurity attack on medical device?
So most of the manufacturers, so the ones which I know are doing that pretty much. It depends on, you have to log all the events happening, and sooner or later you have to have some kind of intelligence in your code which is checking what is logged and then identifying patterns which are not normal. I know that it is not easy to implement, so you might have other means in place, or you, let's say, but to sum it up, it's more or less, I think it's evaluation of log files. So if you log, okay, I had a failed access again, and you had 20,000 failed accesses per second, then maybe you have a cybersecurity issue at the moment. So it's, as I said, what I'm aware of is currently logging and evaluating those logs.
All right, I understand. Thank you for that. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'll quickly go through this. Okay, what is the relationship between the concept assessment and an audit? Can the outcome of the assessment be reused?
Well, of course, if I do a technical documentation or the concept assessment, of course you can reuse it. Yeah, the concept assessment is per device. It's not per company. Of course, we do it per device. But of course, if you had a concept evaluation on infusion pump A and you let's say a year later you build another infusion pump, of course you can reuse the things which came out in the concept assessment, of course. And I don't know whether this really covers the question. Can you read it again? Sorry.
Okay, so the question is, what is the relationship between the concept assessment and an audit? So actually, it's first part. Second part is, can the outcome of the assessment be reused?
Yes, of course, if you have, the relationship is, of course, if you do a concept evaluation with us or with us as test house, and the concept assessment, so the concept assessment again also covers requirements. We are not consulting or anything like this, so we are checking requirements, and if all the requirements are met, probably the technical documentation and the assessment and the audit should be passed. That, of course, should be the conclusion of that one. Keeping in mind that the concept assessment is early in the development phase, So even if you had a concept evaluation but decided to implement it differently, it does not mean that you are directly passing a TD assessment or audit. That's not the case. But if you, let's say, follow the concept, the likelihood is very high that you do not get any critical findings in TD or audit.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think we'll just take one last question, and for the rest, we'll send an email to respond to you directly. Okay, so this question basically asks, are there any requirements for secure lifecycle development?
I probably don't really understand the question. Of course, we have, if it is a secure lifecycle, I would say yes. And if you look at the free guidance which I mentioned, it will contain requirements from requirements phase to the post-market phase. So it's not a question of just testing cybersecurity at the end. So it's a question how you develop a cybersecurity device, and if something happens in the field, how do you react on this one? And that's all covered in the free guidance, and as far as I know, I can already tell you that it will be also covered as part of the upcoming international standard. Again, that's going to be something in 2 years. We will have an international guidance on cybersecurity, which will also cover those activities. So, of course, you have to, the complete life cycle has to be cyber secure. That's true.
All right, thank you, Andrea, so much for explaining and going through all these questions. I'd like to thank the audience as well for being extremely engaged. The questions are still coming in, but unfortunately we don't have any more time, so we will close this webinar today. So we hope that you found this extremely interesting and relevant to you. To get the latest news and regulatory updates and more information, please visit us at twosuit.com/MHS. We also have a dedicated LinkedIn showcase page, which you can get more information about our latest news, regulations, and updates. And in the meantime, if you have any questions regarding today's topics or would like to email Andreas, just drop us an email at medicaldevice@twosuit.com. So once again, thank you for your time and have a good rest of the day ahead. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good one.